Hello, welcome to Forest Focus as we welcome a special guest to the show each Wednesday. And this week it's great to have BBC Radio Nottingham's football presenter, David Jackson, back with us. David, good to see you again. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Obviously, I knew they'd lose at the weekend because I had a text from you last weekend asking if I'd come on the show. So that defeat was inevitable. Thanks for that. So I was going to make it public when you messaged me. I was going to put on Twitter, look, don't hold out any hopes of a win this weekend. Matt's asked me on the podcast next week. So, I'm not going to blame you directly. I'm just going to say it's yet another unfortunate coincidence of your timing of bookings, Matt Davies.
I'd not even thought of that, but you're right. You are right. I think you've been on here to discuss a win once, that I can recall, in about 7 appearances, which is bad because considering we've won so many games of football in the last few years, relatively. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
And even defeats that you wouldn't expect them to have. But, it's not like you've texted me about, can you come on and talk about Man City away? It's like, can you come on and talk about Blackpool in the FA Cup? And then I have to come on and talk about that. So listen, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, Matt. But one time, I'm going to come on and talk about a win.
Hopefully so. I must start with a public apology today as well, because David texted me about half an hour before we were meant to record this morning saying, what are we talking about? And I realised I got it in my head that we were doing this on Wednesday, not Tuesday. So big apologies to David. Good to have him with us.
What a great start.
Yeah, exactly. Right, on the agenda today, we'll talk a little bit about the Fulham game, but not dwell on it, because I think that we want to turn the page now. We'll look at the upcoming block of games from Chelsea, but mostly the international break. And we'll do quite a chunk of chat on Taiwo, because I had an interesting question about him that wasn't in our Q&A yesterday, as was with Fletch and Emily. Starting with Fulham then, David, there's a bit of a consensus on the podcast that, the team was a bit strange that Nuno picked and it backfired. So what was the reaction when it came out at 1:45 for you guys? Did you think this is interesting? This could be brilliant. He's going to look like a genius if it works, or he's making a rod for his own back if this backfires?
Well, the first thing was, we got the team about 1:45 and then we go on the radio at 2. And the first thing we do is do the team news. And then straight after that, we'll have a chat. Sometimes it's a very short conversation. Sometimes it's a longer conversation with whoever's the summariser with Colin about the team news. And this was a slightly longer conversation, partly because we weren't 100% sure what the formation would be, because it seemed to lend itself to a 4-4-2. But we thought, you don't get 4-4-2, do you? Who sees a 4-4-2 in the Premier League these days? And Brian Laws was saying actually that he'd been talking with Archie Gemmell in the week. And Archie had said to him, do you think we'll ever see a 4-4-2 in the Premier League again? And little did he realise that 3 days later, his old club Forest would actually be playing a 4-4-2, because we weren't sure at that point whether it could have been a sort of 4-3-3 instead. But once it started and he realised it was a very definite sort of old-fashioned 4-4-2 formation, it absolutely raised eyebrows. And we looked at it, I think, mainly apart from the formation, in terms of the selection, when you're going to be missing Morgan Gibbs-White, your main creative player, to then decide to leave out both Callum Hudson-Odoi and Anthony Elanga is brave and interesting. I think because he's got plenty in the bank, Nuno, because of his tactics from the game at Liverpool, particularly, where, again, he's left those two out, played a formation that's worked wonders at Anfield and ultimately won them the game. You say, okay, well, this is what he's doing for this one. Those two are on the bench. I'm sure we'll see them at some point, and we'll see what the plan is and how it works out. They've still got players who can get crosses into the box. You've got Ward-Prowse, you've got Anderson, you've got Ola Aina, all of whom can deliver balls into the box for those two strikers. So it's not like you're relying necessarily on your out-and-out wingers out of Elanga and Hudson-Odoi to do that. You've got other players who can deliver those balls in. And that almost produced 2 goals in the first half. Of course, Chris Woods that was narrowly offside, and Awoniyi that went just over the bar. But in the end, they lost. So you have to say it didn't work. But it could have done, I guess. If the Chris Wood one ends up being allowed, if that's just on the side, then you suddenly 1-0 up. It's a different game. And maybe we're having a different conversation, because then maybe later you bring on Hudson-Odoi and Elanga and everyone's hailing Nuno a genius. As it is, they didn't get the narrow penalty calls. They did get the one given against them, and they've lost the game 1-0. And then when you look at the formation of the team selection, you can't help, and this is how I started the conversation with Brian Laws after the game, is, well, they missed Gibbs White, didn't they? They missed that. There was no kind of replacement for that, in a sense. And it's very hard to replace that energy and that ability to just turn defence into attack and get Forest moving in that way, and that level of creativity. They missed him, and that formation in the end didn't generate as much creativity as they would have when Gibbs White's in the team. They lost the game. It can happen. It's Premier League.
Yeah. Well, that leads into discussing Morgan a little bit. I kind of thought that he overcompensated and hoovered a little bit too much creativity out of the game. So it's difficult to judge if there's kind of red flags, and we don't have Morgan in the team to an extent. I mean, did it spell trouble for you? Are we going to struggle if Morgan's ever unavailable again, or do we have to judge it on a bigger sample size of data in a sense?
I think, like most people, really, I think the day before the game and on the morning of the game, we were looking at what to do without him in the team. And I think we all thought, push Anderson into the 10, bring Ryan Yates in alongside Ward-Prowse a bit deeper. That seems like a simple, straightforward swap. Or you might want to put Jota Silva in, or, maybe it'll just be a direct one there and Anderson can stay a bit deeper alongside Ward-Prowse. And so to have done more than that, that then makes you raise questions about it. I think if they lose and he just plays that original system, but just with the one swap, I think there's probably, fewer questions from supporters about it, really. Does it raise a bigger question about missing Gibbs White? Look, Gibbs White's an exceptional player. He's been picked for England. Forest have got a couple of players now in their team, Gibbs White and Murillo, who really stand out. They really stand out, even at Premier League level. And of course, if you're going to miss one of those, that's going to be a big loss. It just is. Forest are not at the stage where they've got depth for a player like that. Look at Manchester City and the quotes, the stats that people are quoting about Rodri and the amount of wins they have without him compared to with him, and people questioning, well, that's it. That's the title gone for them now, maybe because they're missing one player. That's football. When you've got a player who's that influential in your team, and I don't think we should be too downcast about that, really. I think that's normal when you've got a player who's that good. When he's out, that's going to be a loss. That was not really a surprise. But I think if they want to keep playing a sort of 4-2-3-1, then that'll be interesting to see then, I think, directly in that kind of formation, if Anderson is in there, or if you move things around a bit with Jota Silva, or you try other things in around there longer term, then we'll see. But it's just inevitable, isn't it? You've got a player of that ability. That's normal. In defence, if Murillo's out and you put in someone else into the centre-back position, you're going to say, well, you're going to miss Murillo. It's just inevitable.
Yeah, I don't think we can judge it properly until you've got to play a like-for-like formation and see how Anderson does as a 10. I think it will be him. You could play Jota there, but yeah, I agree. I mean, one thing we haven't discussed on the podcast we've done this week is the other missing midfielders, because we've just got used to it. Danilo and Sangare. I kind of feel like we really missed Danilo's energy in that game on Saturday. He's the number 8 who can break and sort of make things happen. Is that something that we have to kind of factor in? That Nuno's 2 first choice midfielders at the start of the season are out, and do you think we're missing one more than the other?
I don't think you can say they're missing Sangare, because we haven't really seen enough from Sangare yet as to what he's about, because he's had injuries and he's been out, and he's not, when he's played, he's not had enough time perhaps to get up to the pace of the Premier League. So you can't miss somebody who's not delivered what they're capable of. Once he starts delivering that, if he gets into the team and we start seeing what he's really all about and how he can dominate games, or has certainly at PSV, then maybe we can say we're missing him. I don't think you can say you're missing him at the moment, because what Forest are getting at the moment is certainly no worse than they had when he was there. So Danilo, I agree, that may well have been a game for Danilo and may have provided exactly that energy that Gibbs White can bring, of kind of charging up and down, and his energy and his perhaps a bit of inventiveness as well. I really liked Danilo, and I thought this was going to be a really good year for him, a big year for him. I was looking forward to seeing him from the start, and then he's obviously got that injury. So yeah, in that game, yep, absolutely. I think it's fair to bring up players who you're missing to put things into context. And I think certainly Danilo, you'd say, yeah, look, they are. He's a miss certainly in the squad. And if you've got him, you've got another option, and you've got an energetic, creative player who likes to get forward, can get back, can tackle. Really good player, and I think can go on to become a really good player for Forest. Just a shame he's out now. So yeah, worth remembering. I think it's definitely worth remembering that Forest have got players like that missing. Apart from anything, it makes you realise, well, when they come back, we'll be quite strong in that area.
Yeah, massively. I mean, obviously they're not going to be back for a while. And we've got this interesting block of games coming up that I want to get David's thoughts on. The Chelsea game isn't one you dismiss, obviously, but it's the last game before the international break. We said, but I think last live show with Lewis and the others, we were discussing how many points from these next 4 games. I think we all said 3 or 4 is acceptable. We've already got 4, so that's good. We've got Chelsea to finish this block. I mean, I massively take a point. I think that Cole Palmer's now looking pretty scary, but we won't play like Brighton did. But what are your early thoughts on this game?
I mean, seeing Cole Palmer play like he did last weekend, watching the highlights on Match of the Day and being able to just ping a free kick in like that into the top corner and break through, just scores different kinds of goals as well. He's such a pleasure to watch. He's such a brilliant footballer. I was screaming at the telly all summer, just wanting Cole Palmer in that England team, because he was seeing him last season against Forest. Some of the passes he can pick out as well, by the way, to get players into positions. His vision's unbelievable. What a player! So add to that the fact that they are scoring a lot of goals from a lot of different players. Remember going there last year, Nicholas Jackson missed a load of sitters. One in particular from close range. He isn't missing those at the moment. So they've got. I mean, and understandably, given the amount of money they've spent, they've got a heck of a bunch of players there now. And it seems like pretty early on, at times, they are looking phenomenally good together. So I don't think you can go into that game expecting anything. At the back of your mind, you have got the Forest went to Liverpool and won. And the fact that they went to Brighton and got a draw despite ending that with 10 men. So yeah, I get it. And I think away from home, Forest are undoubtedly a different prospect now to what they have been in the first 2 years. And yes, they're unbeaten away in a little run of matches because of Sheffield United and Burnley at the end of last season and Southampton, Liverpool and Brighton at the start of this. So yeah, there's all that. But I think Chelsea are particularly good at the moment. So I think you go into this one thinking anything at all is a massive bonus because, playing at Stamford Bridge against Chelsea in the form they're in, that's a scary prospect because they put 6 past Wolves earlier in the season. They're capable of turning it on to that extent. So, but you never know. It's football, isn't it? It's why we keep turning up because you never know. And Forest away from home, as I say, are better. They're more solid. They can be more compact, and they look more like a Premier League team in those matches. They don't panic and rush into challenges like they were doing in the first season. So they're certainly more of a challenge to overcome. But Chelsea are capable, I think, of scoring quite a few goals against just about anybody in the Premier League. So it's got to see which Chelsea turns up really apart before we worry about Forest.
That's what I was going to say. I think the challenge is, can we keep them to 1 goal? Because I think we can score against them. Like Brighton scored twice, Wolves scored twice. They'll give you a chance. It's like, if we can get 1 goal, can we restrict them to 1? And we might be able. I mean, our defensive numbers are very strong if you look at the underlying stats. And like Milenkovic and Murillo, where would you rank them as a defensive pair in the Premier League, out of curiosity?
Well, I would say, I mean, it's interesting. Those two, you see those two together and you see how well and how confidently they defend. And they're so much better than anything we've had before. And it was interesting at Liverpool, there were moments when I was looking back to past seasons and remembering a lot of players kind of dive in for challenges. I remember Joe Worrell at Spurs and giving away a penalty, and he was not the only one, so I don't just want to highlight him, but there were loads of others of players just rushing into a challenge and they'd end up giving away a penalty. And at no point did anybody do that. Milenkovic on the edge of his box just like took the ball off, I think Jota Silva or whoever it was, and just started the Forest attack that led to the goal. And it was calm. And I've not seen anything like that from Forest for a very long time. We know Murillo's being talked about with moves to, huge clubs around Europe, and rightly so, and rumoured to be potential for the Brazil first team, and, understandably so. And you look at Milenkovic and think, well, there'd be a lot of clubs surely would take Milenkovic, given how quickly he's settled into the Premier League. So as a central defensive partnership, adding to that the form of Aina, adding to that what Alex Moreno can do and how incredible he was at Anfield against Mo Salah, I think you've got a back four there that a lot of Premier League teams would happily swap you for.
I think Milenkovic is great. Like, I don't want to put the curse on him, but he's massively underpriced. I don't know how we got him for 12.5 million. No. He looks like he should be worth 25. And then I think he's added 20 million onto Murillo's valuation because he just lets him play. So you raise a good point as well. I hadn't thought of this, but the amount of times he blocks shots against Fulham, wins a header, a little interception to get Aina out of trouble a couple of times second half, like he's just elevated the quality of the back line like significantly. So yeah, he's the best signing we made, I would say, out of all the ones this summer, off the top of my head, certainly. Just before we move on to talk about the next batch of games, get David's thoughts on those. This is coming out on Wednesday, so Wednesday nights is now you can get a Peroni and a pizza for 12 quid at the NAV and watch the Champions League games. So I'll show that one again. Obviously, I vouch for the pizzas and I'll vouch for Peroni as well. David, regular guests or regular viewers know that if a guest comes on and we talk about pizzas, they get asked what their favourite pizza is. Putting you on the spot.
My favourite pizza? I think any pizza. Is there such a thing as a bad one? I don't think I've ever had a bad one.
Tuna?
The only thing I say,
I would say I'm not a fan of that on pizzas.
No, that's true. I might agree with that. Or I have once made the mistake of having a pizza that had hoisin on it because it was like a duck pizza. I think anything sweet I don't like. No barbecue or anything like that. Anything else?
Very good. Do you have a lager of choice, out of curiosity?
And are you needing me to say Peroni now?
No, I'm not needing you to say Peroni. I wouldn't say. I like a Peroni, but I wouldn't say Peroni.
I'm not a lager drinker, really. I'll have anything if they've got it on tap. But I'd probably generally choose an ale because I'm a bit of an older man with a beard, so I think that's normal.
So am I. But I would go for a lager over an ale, and I can't drink Guinness either. I find it too heavy and a bit too much. So, right, back to business, back to football business. The next 4 block of games is the next international break. I think are really interesting. Palace home, Leicester away, West Ham home, Newcastle home. We'll have played 11 games by then, so we'll kind of pass that threshold to know what kind of team we are. And more specifically, we'll have played 3 home games out of 4 against teams, especially Palace and West Ham, that you would kind of hope to beat, wouldn't you, when you look at the fixtures at the start of the season?
Yeah, but I think Forest are also a really good warning against doing what we're about to do, because you look at the last few games and beat Liverpool away and lose at home to Fulham. That's kind of that's where Forest are, aren't they? I know what you're saying, and I think certainly they could do with a home win because you can't go on much longer without a home win. I think this season they need to kind of get that over the line, and they need to get that noise back around the City ground a little bit more, because I think we've walked away from the City ground for the last few home games thinking, that was a missed opportunity, conceding late against Bournemouth, and then Wolves, should have beaten them, but just a worldy goal has ended up costing them points in that one. And then you walk away from the Fulham game thinking, well, what's happened there? We've not quite got that either. So 3 games now, and there they are sitting, mid-table, but weirdly, it's the away form that's got them there. So yeah, that has got to turn around, and those games that they've got coming up feel like a good opportunity to do that. and a good opportunity to establish themselves further as a mid-table team. Certainly a team that hopefully isn't going to struggle at the bottom end of the table this season. And I think what happens is you get to a certain point and you look back on games and think, well, if only we'd won that, if only we'd won that, if only they've got extra points from this and they should have got this and should have got that. And you look back at missed opportunities. And I think we're already doing that, aren't we? With 2 games, 3 games now, the home games. You can't do that with many more. Winning games away at Liverpool have got to be considered as bonuses, really. And then you've got to have your steady kind of amount. You're not going to win them all, but you're going to have to win some of those. And not having won in the first 3 just perhaps adds a little bit more spotlight onto those home games. Newcastle's an unpredictable one because who knows which Newcastle will turn up. Again, they're another one of those teams. You look at some of the goals they score, Harvey Barnes can just wriggle around and belt one in the top corner. Fantastic. They've got Isak can just score loads of goals. They've got really good players throughout Newcastle, but then catch them on the right day and you can beat them. Fulham did the other week. It's not, in terms of the Premier League, it isn't the most intimidating run of fixtures. But as we've learned, any game in the Premier League is losable. So I look at those fixtures and think, maybe at the end of that we'll have a decent idea. You always do after 10, 11 games, don't you, as to roughly what kind of season it's going to be. And I think as long as they are above about 15th by then, I think we should take that as okay. And I know that might sound negative because that would mean dropping a few places, but I just think let's remember where Forest have been for the last 2 years. And I think some people have got a bit overexcited and thought that beating Liverpool away means suddenly they're going to be able to compete for Europe this year. I think if after 10, 11 games, they are around mid-table and not towards the bottom, I think that's okay. And I think as long as what you're seeing in games is progress and is encouraging, and that you're seeing progress from players that gives you confidence that they can go on and be better through the course of the season, really.
I think I'd agree with that. I was saying, consistently said if we finish 14th, we've had a good season. And you kind of know after 10 games roughly what kind of team you are. So if we're in that bracket, then that's good. And Luke Fletcher this morning made a similar point about, he said, as an athlete, you can't really view games in brackets. You view the next one and try and perform. So that's certainly fair. I think the interesting thing around the home games is if they don't win in the next 2, or if they lose the next 2, there's a real narrative around it that we're crap at home, and you don't want that to set in. But if you win the next 2, then you think, oh, we're winning games away. We look a good Premier League team, and we're really upwardly mobile. But you can always do that around sets of Premier League games. Almost any Premier League game, it feels like there's a narrative that forms, isn't there?
Yeah, some coaches do use groups of matches, though.
Allardyce did, didn't he?
Yeah, I think, quite a few do put up groups of matches and say, right, this is how many points we want from this. And it can be quite a good tool as well, because then if you reach that tally early, the players almost feel like they've got a free hit. So that can be a real motivating factor as well, that they can go into a game thinking, well, we've already got our 10 points that we thought we'd get. So we can experiment a bit, we can try a bit, we could take a risk here. So sports people always say next game, one game at a time, but actually sometimes groups of matches is okay. And of course, you're right about that perception of home form and how stats change with one result. Win those next 2 and people are talking about 1 defeat in 5 at home, which doesn't sound too bad, but don't win them and people are looking back to the fact they haven't won at home since April when they beat Fulham. And that feels like a long time. So yes, you've got to try and stop that narrative. You've got to make sure that narrative doesn't happen. Nuno, I'm sure, will tell you that it doesn't matter where the points come from, home or away, but equally, it just is important. You're going to play half your matches at home. So you need those supporters on board. You need to make that a place that players are comfortable to play, that want to play, and winning games is of course the way to do it. And I think supporters have their part to play in that as well. We've seen the impact they've had over the last 2 years, just sort of dragging them up out of the relegation zone at times over the last 2 years. And I hope that stays, although it's not a promotion push or a relegation fight, if it's the difference between finishing 16th and 13th, you can have that impact, and that can help drag them up more. So continue to have that impact is what I'd say to supporters. Continue to make the City Ground, the stadium that it's been over the last couple of years, noisy and supportive and magical and intimidating all at the same time. So keep doing that. And I think that will help the team. And it might not be the same level of reward because you don't get the instant hit of promotion or the instant hit of survival on the final day. But what you will do is you'll see progress, and you'll see progress quicker and far more satisfying if you've played a big part in it. And just by being noisy when you go to games on Saturday, I think you can do that. And I hope that, and I'm sure it will continue throughout the course of this season.
Yeah, and I don't know how much you get now for finishing a place higher in the Premier League. It's like something like 2.5 million quid or something mad. Yeah. So if you finish 3 places higher, then that's another signings, half a signing or something. So yeah, there's that. Billy Davies used to bracket games as well. I was thinking, I'm pretty sure he did. Yeah. So yeah, some coaches do it, definitely. We didn't really touch on the Leicester game. It's a long way off. But it's interesting because there's the Steve Cooper factor, and I was looking their next 2 games at Southampton and Bournemouth or Ipswich. I think it's Southampton and Bournemouth, and then they play us. Leicester fans are getting antsy already. It could be a very interesting game, just regardless of the fact it's Leicester v Forest anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Leicester were expecting out of this season, really, because they've had the troubles with the money. They've had a season out of the Premier League now. I think they'd be coming up. I would be expecting them to be the lower end of the table and fighting against relegation. And I think that's probably why they looked for somebody like Steve Cooper to take over, somebody who's got a proven track record of generating a spirit around a football club and helping them stay in the Premier League, because that's what he's done with Forest. And even when he went, they were outside of the relegation zone, I think, at Forest. So he was doing a good job with, we know we've discussed on this podcast, and I've discussed on the radio many times, all the other challenges that were going around Forest at that time. What a brilliant job he did. So you look at what Leicester have got. I think if he's allowed to get on with that and to generate that atmosphere that they need down at Leicester, I think that's probably why he's doing a lot of talk about the refereeing decisions and the sort of conspiracy kind of ideas to try and generate the world's against us feeling, to try and help keep them up. And I think it's working. I mean, they were 2-0 down to Arsenal away from home. Not many are going to come back to 2-2. I know they then went on to lose deep in stoppage time, but they got back to that position. So there's some fight there. But I think they've appointed him to keep them up. And maybe even at the back of their mind, if they go down, who better to get a team, back promoted to the Premier League than Steve Cooper. So, and also you look at them with Brendan Rodgers, when he was under a lot of pressure from supporters for a long time, they didn't instantly react and sack him. It was a long, long time later before they decided to make that change. So the only thing is whether, if, and the big ifs, but if they were to keep losing matches and then lose to Forest, and if it were to just turn in that way, there's a lot of ifs along that way, then he might start to come under some serious pressure. But who knows? They might win 1 or 2 before they play Forest, and then it'll be very different again. But I think they've got him in to do the job that he's now having to try and do. And there's no point getting rid of him 2 months into the season, surely. Yeah,
I think his problem is that I don't think Leicester fans will let him generate a spirit, because I just don't think they've had him from day one. That's a big issue.
Well, but win games and that changes. You look at any manager going into a club and they might not be wanted at the start. And if you remember when you mentioned Billy Davies a moment ago, when Billy Davies came into Forest, he was just ex-Derby. He was a man who'd just been at Derby before, and people didn't want him at first. But you win matches and you generate a feeling. You can win supporters over. Winning games, being successful, just completely changes the vibe. Supporters aren't going to be anti-Steve Cooper if they're winning matches.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. I'll just have a quick look. So I want to get his fixtures right because it will shape the build-up. Bournemouth at home, Southampton away. Sorry. So yeah, interesting games. Bournemouth are decent, actually, to be fair. Right. Last topic I want to discuss in the next 10 minutes or so. We want to have a proper chat, about Taiwo. Actually, I'll come to that in a sec. Sorry, there was two questions I wanted to ask, and we'll finish on Taiwo.
Okay.
These were questions that listeners submitted that we didn't get to in the Q&A. So one was from Jim Freeman. It just says, does Nuno know his best 11? What's your take on that, David? If you asked Nuno to name his best 11, could he do it, or do we have to do different scenarios, different teams? How would you view that?
Yeah, it's a boring answer, but it's true. I think he'll have a different 11 for different games, and I think that's proven. And also, I think it's not really about 11 anymore. Subs have become so much more important over the last few years because you're allowed so many of them that it's not really about a starting 11 anymore. So I would say, again, to come back to it, that Liverpool system, that Liverpool formation that he played was absolutely the right starting 11 for that game. And as part of that comes the fact that Elanga and Hudson-Odoi were brought on to add that pace, that width to stretch the game just at the point that Liverpool were going to have to start trying to gamble a little bit more to stretch it to then go to the other end and win it. So it's about tactics formations for certain games, certainly. That said, he seems to generally favour the 4-2-3-1 as most Premier League clubs do. I think generally speaking, he'd probably at the moment want the sort of Gibbs, White, Hudson-Odoi, Elanga. I think you look at some of the other players that he's bringing off the bench at the moment. We talked about Jota earlier, the Ramon Sousa as well, who maybe longer term might get into that team if they end up, who knows, making a sale or something in January or next year. So that's maybe part of a succession plan. I think certainly you'd say Milenkovic and Murillo at the back. In terms of fullbacks, that's difficult because Aina can just play either. But the way Moreno played, I'd probably want Aina on the right and Moreno on the left at the moment. But these things can change depending on players' form and things like that, really. So I think for each game, he probably does have a favoured 11. I don't think he was changing the team at the weekend just because he didn't know what his favoured 11 was. I think he picked that team because he thought that team was the right system to beat Fulham on the day. So I don't think we're going to end up with Nuno having a set 11 week in, week out. I don't think. It certainly doesn't seem to be. The fact that he's now just surprised everybody by completely changing formation and doing different things makes me think that we're not really going to get that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, Saturday's team was kind of like the team a manager picks when they haven't won in 5 games, not when they haven't lost in 5 games. It was a bit of a slightly radical departure. I don't know if Jim would ask the question, before the Fulham game. It's just after the Fulham game. It looks a little bit odd, but I think Nuno does know his best 11. Like David said, I think he's probably got a best 11 for away at the top 6 and at home to everyone but the top 6. I'm hoping the Fulham game was a bit of an anomaly and we'll see the wingers play more. Because if we don't see the wingers play more, he's going to have 2 unhappy wingers in Elanga and Hudson-Odoi if they're coming off the bench in 60-70% of the games. So I think it was probably just a one-off for me. Let's talk about Taiwo then. This was a question from Binit Patel. Are we starting to see the risk materialise of not securing a backup striker in the summer? Would you be tempted to sell Taiwo in January if possible if we get another striker in to the end of the season in the hope we see his best again? And what is that hope based on, if so? So before we talk about it, I did a little bit of looking at Taiwo's stats since he's come to the club. Excuse me. He's 27 years old, obviously, and he's got a contract till 2027. So he's still got a lot of market value in that sense. First season at the club, 10 goals and assists in 27 games. So that's a goal contribution every 127 minutes, which is good. Second season, 6 goals, 3 assists in 20 games. That's every goal of contribution every 116 minutes, which is better. So when he's fit, he's delivering. I think the problem is he's been injured for 27 games out of the 76 that we've played. I think he's only been available for 62% of the games. And the last 9 games last season when he was available, he wasn't particularly right either. So that does qualify things. So going back to Binnett's question, David, What are you thinking about Taiwo right now, and would you sell him in January if possible?
The question was, would you sell him if you could get another striker in? I think if you're selling him, you probably need to get two strikers in, don't you? Because I don't think having two centre forwards is enough, really, and they don't have anybody naturally able to fill in that position if either of those gets injured. So if you're at the moment, if you lose one of them, then Nuno's options are limited to playing one up front. If you lose both, I don't know what they do. I don't know. Play Gibbs White as a false nine, maybe.
They'll play Elanga.
Which
I really hate.
Langer's
a striker.
Yeah, I agree. I prefer Elanga out wide. I wouldn't necessarily want Elanga as a centre forward, and maybe you're right. Maybe that's what they do. So I think they're one short anyway. So no, I wouldn't be wanting to sell him to replace with one other. I'd be wanting to sign a striker anyway, so that you've got other options. So maybe a different kind of striker, so that you've got other different options. If you've got a sort of a nippy striker, a striker with that extra bit of pace as well to give you that option kind of in the sort of central position, maybe,
well, they do have Jota. I know people watch this in the comments are going to say you would play Jota as the third striker, which they do have as well, I guess, as a backup.
Yeah, but I still feel like they've got depth in certain areas on the pitch. I don't think they've got enough depth in that. They're playing both of them up front at the weekend, and it seems odd you can play two strikers and yet you've not got a direct replacement. Kind of, if one of them gets injured, you're having to completely change the formation. And in the Premier League, with the amount of subs you're allowed these days, that's a problem. So I think I'd be wanting them to sign one anyway. And I know January, talk about the cliche of January being a difficult market to try and get strikers, of course, and it's a cliche because it's true. But they're lacking. So I think if you're talking about selling Awoniyi, if Awoniyi's fit, as the stats have proved, and we've always said, if Awoniyi's fit and he's firing, he's an incredibly valuable player to have in your team. He can score goals, he can cause problems, and you see how defenders struggle to deal with him as well when he just blasts his way through. And he could have had a lot more rewards than that. My mind immediately goes to the Newcastle game last season when he should have had a penalty taken of the keeper, and it's clearly a penalty that wasn't given. There's been a few incidences like that where he's caused teams problems and perhaps not got the reward that he should have had. So I like him, but yeah, if he's not fully fit. And we've seen that in games when you see him playing and he's looked a bit sluggish. And I remember the Brentford away game, I think last year, and we were watching and thought he's just tired. He's played too much football when he's still recovering from injury. He's ineffective in that situation. So when you're quoting the amount of games he's played in, you take out some of those games where actually he just wasn't fit and shouldn't have been playing. And actually look at the stats when he's played and he's been fit, and then you look at the numbers, you'd see his numbers are pretty remarkable. But how much of that are we going to see? I don't know. We've had him for 2 years and he's not played loads and loads of games. I remember when he had the operation last year, I think it was Steve Cooper might have still been in charge. Maybe it was Nuno, forgive me. But he said they're hoping that by having the operation, that will sort it for good and he'll come back and he'll just be fit and it'll be fine. We've not quite seen that yet. So I think we're still waiting for that to happen. If it does, and we see a fully fit Awoniyi in the team, I'd want him in there. But that's the if, really. And Chris Wood will just consistently perform probably until he's about 50, I think. He'll just keep doing what he does. He'll pop up, he'll score goals, he'll be professional, and he'll just get on with it. And as soon as anybody doubts him, he'll just pop up the next week and nod another one in and crack on. So I like them both. But when you look at the quality and the depth Forest have in other areas, centre forward position kind of stands out a little bit. And I think a lot of clubs are like it. I don't think centre forward is the position that used to be, if you know what I mean. I know that sounds a bit silly because it's the same position. But, the day of the striker, you kind of think of the Stan Collymore and Robbie Fowler and Andy Cole, and the day of the striker is not quite the same. Erling Haaland apart. The focus of teams really now is more about that front line of number 10 and wingers, things rather than your centre forward. but you still need one. You still need one to get the goals, although it may not be the be all and end all in some ways that it has been in the past. So I think then the answer, very long-winded answer to the question, no, I wouldn't sell Awoniyi to bring one more in. If you're going to sell Awoniyi, I think you need two more in.
I think you're right about strikers. Like Haaland's an exception to the rule. I think teams now seem to build not around strikers. Strikers are just there to finish off chances a lot of the time. They don't even link the play as much as they used to. Some of them barely have touches. So it is a changed role. I think there's like a bit of a perceptions emerge around Taiwo. I think they're a bit unfair, some of them. I mean, firstly, it really winds me up if people say he's lazy, because I don't think he is at all. I just think there's things around form and fitness. Like people when Woodsack at the first sign said he's lazy and all that kind of stuff. I think he just wasn't playing very well and he wasn't very fit. And part of that is Taiwo's not in form. And also, like David said, we played him last season when he shouldn't have been anywhere near the team because we were desperate, and it creates the perception that he's gone, he's rubbish, and I don't think he is. I think we just slogged him last season when he should have been out of it because we didn't have another striker. I think he's looking better this season. I don't think he's playing well, but you could see signs against Fulham. I think I'll finish the rest of my points in a sec. But what was your perception of him against Fulham?
If I may go back a bit further than that to the Newcastle game in the Cup, and I thought in the first half an hour against Newcastle, I thought he looked good. I thought he was a bit of pace running about and flicked a couple of passes out to the wing and was getting back and linking the play. I think he looked really good. By the end, he looked exhausted and then stepped up to take that penalty, which obviously didn't go very well. So that first half an hour, I watched him. I thought, wow, okay, he's on it here tonight, but he just needs game time. But he's not getting game time because Chris Wood's in there and Chris Wood's doing a good job and scoring goals. So it's going to be difficult for him. I thought on Saturday, probably if he's on his own up front with a three behind him, you see more from him. I thought he was unlucky with the overhead kick. And I thought that was an interesting effort to try and do from the position he was in, and was really unlucky with it. So look, he's not played a lot of football. He's not played a lot of football. So it's about what I would have expected from him at the moment, if I'm honest. I think if he was given a run of games in that 4-2-3-1, we'd probably see him getting back to it. But I wouldn't drop Chris Wood in order for that to happen. So I think we're a bit sort of stuck in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. It's a tricky situation. I feel for him because he missed a chunk of pre-season with a personal issue. He wasn't injured, so that hampered him as well. And I do kind of question slightly the way he's been managed. I will go back to playing him when he's not really fully fit. We played him for 100 minutes against Newcastle and then didn't see him for weeks and throw him back into the starting lineup. I don't think we've done him massive amount of favours. I can see, I'm not questioning Nuno's job because he's done very well. We've picked up results. Chris Wood's been great, but Taiwo's not had it massively easy with the opportunities he's been presented. I thought he was fine on Saturday, but the question was about selling him as well. I mean, it's difficult to sell him, isn't it? Because what's he worth? When David talks about him being fully fit and firing, at his very best, he's probably worth 50 million quid. At the moment, he's probably worth 15 or something like what we paid for him. And I wouldn't sell him for 15 million. So you'd be looking at getting a bid over the odds for him. You're not going to get that in. Well, you might get that in January. So there's so much that goes into these things, I think. For me, I think you keep him, you give him minutes off the bench as much as you can, and then you reassess it in January. That's what I would be doing with him.
Yeah, the other thing I would say is, I get your point about, suddenly chucked in and playing 90 odd minutes or 100 minutes against Newcastle and then out and then in. That is the life often of a Premier League footballer, because
that's true. Yeah,
then it's a squad game and you're just going to be called on at any point. And Ryan Yates will miss a couple of games and then suddenly be chucked in and expected to play 90 minutes and then might be out again for another one. Or, the same thing might happen to anyone. And when you're in, you've just got to be ready. And that's that. I think maybe Taiwo Awoniyi, because of his injury problems, and maybe that's why. Maybe it's not. I mean, I haven't spoken to him about it. I don't know, but maybe that's why. It just perhaps takes him a little bit. It's taking him a bit of time and needs a run of games, and maybe for him that's what he needs, a run of games to get up to his best. And I'm not sure where that's going to come from, unless there's an injury to Chris Wood and then he'll get in, and then maybe he'll start scoring goals again, and it'll kind of start to see the real Taiwo Awoniyi come back again. But that just is what you have to do, I think, as a Premier League player these days. Get a chance, you've got to take it, and you've got to be ready to play 90 minutes, because that's how long a game is. Yeah. And it sounds harsh, but it's just that's what you're going to do.
It is tough though, isn't it? It's hard. I know Gary often talks about rhythm for strikers, and I was thinking, well, you talk about, Pep Guardiola talks about rhythm so much. Like they played Wickham in Watford in the Carling Cup, Carabao Cup, and named virtually, every player was a senior pro that played. He didn't make sweeping changes, and he doesn't make subs in games either. So that was what I was thinking about, rhythm and reps, especially as a striker as well. So we've answered this in a very long-winded 15-minute way. I still think there's a player there. I think there's evidence that we're starting to see, but there's no guarantees with Taiwo, I would say, and I would have more faith in Chris Wood right now, and he'd be the starting striker for sure. I hope that answers the question, Bennett. I feel like we've gone round.
We've answered that and many others.
If you've got any question on Taiwo Awoniyi in the next 6 months or so, come back to this, and hopefully we've already answered it. Right, I think that covers everything. Just before we finish up with any final thoughts, any other business, if you'd like this, do us a favor and hit like on this video. You can become a channel member, or we've got an extra members show with player ratings after every game, and maybe a couple of other changes beyond getting this video released in advance. Members get recorded interviews early, and do subscribe and give us a lovely review on iTunes. You've got your own podcast, David, beyond Radio Nottingham duties. Anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I mean, if you like this podcast and listening to people talk about Forest, then you can listen to Shut Up and Show More Football as well, our podcast, which is all about Forest. Myself and Colin Frey just sit and have a chat, usually on a Thursday, about the week that was and what's coming up and any of the big issues at the time. So if you like listening to people chat about Forest, then you might like that one. You can find it. It's called Shut Up and Show More Football, which is a Cloughie quote from back in the day with an argument he had with John Motson. So you can find that on BBC Sounds and elsewhere as well. So have a listen.
Was the most recent one the Marinakis one? And was it Ola Aina you had on as well? Have you had
we chatted to Ola Aina. Colin went down and asked him about the eggs. With Callum Hudson-Odoi. And he gave he's just a lovely guy, Ola. So he gave a really nice answer to Colin about the eggs. So you can find that. And there was, we discussed the sort of stuff. You could hear what Marinakis had to say in that interview with the BBC, talking about the City ground. So we sort of talked around that as well. Yeah. So there's occasionally, interviews with special guests and stuff that are on there, but generally we'll kind of just chew the fat between us, and a little bit of info behind the scenes of what the post-match interviews or pre-match have been like, and how Colin's been down there and got them. So it's perhaps a little bit more in-depth stuff than you might get if you just listen to it on the radio. So hopefully, if you like that kind of thing, then give us a listen, and you'd be very welcome.
Yeah, check it out. I've got it stuck in my head. It's Ola Aina, and I think it might be Ola Aina when I've heard him interviewed.
Actually, Colin asked him when he first signed, and he said he doesn't mind. Firstly, but he said, well, how do you say it? And he said, well, I'd say Ola Aina. And he said, yeah. He said, that's fine. He said, or Ola, I don't mind. That's fine. And then on the Premier League video, the players all do a description of how to pronounce their name, right, for broadcasters and people to see. And he called himself Ola Aina. So now we've got him in person saying Ola Aina and him telling us Ola Aina. So we've kind of stuck with Aina because that's what we've said from the start, and that's what he told us. But I don't think either is wrong in that sense.
It's interesting how people talk about their own names. If I called you Davies Jackson, I think you'd probably think it was weird. But
I wouldn't mind. I'd answer to it though. It's fine.
Oh, Mrs. Jackson probably calls you worse. Don't worry.
It's
Right,
true.
we shall leave it there. Back tomorrow with the match preview with myself, Greg, Pete, and the other Matt Davies, as he's become known on our podcast, Matt Davis Adams, because he talks about, commentates on Chelsea, so a foot in both camps, sort of. And then opposition preview is with Harry Daniels, a Chelsea fan. If you play FPL, and watch any YouTube content, you'll have heard of FPL Harry, I'm sure. So we chat to him. And then post-match show on Sunday. I'm very prepared this week. I've already lined up the guests. I'm not so prepared that I turn up on time for interviews, as David will know. But Sunday is with Ruby Naylor, Paul Morley, and Mark Southerns. I think the first one we've done with 4 of us chatting about the game. So check that out at 4:30. David, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you. And please book me on after a win next time.
I'll arrange this after the game then next time, not before. I won't plan ahead at all. Right. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a good day. And if we don't see you tomorrow, we shall see you soon.